Is it working yet? I have no idea. Let's move this a bit better. All right, looks like we're live about 10 minutes earlier than I had put on the thing, but yeah. Welcome everybody to this wonderful Sydney morning. It is pouring down outside over here. We are having a lot of rain the last couple of days, and it's quite horrible. But it gives us, well, we're stuck inside anyway, working. So not really something that we have too much trouble with. But yeah, welcome again. Not sure if anybody is watching it. Oh, Evil Chair Slayer, welcome. Yeah, I decided on a bit of a whim to do a stream during the day today, while I am working on Godot itself. Not sure if that's going to be very successful or not. I just figured I'd give it a try, see how things go, whether it is something that is enjoyable, whether people like to watch along, or whether, you know, this is not conductive. We will see. We will see. Hi, Brewhog. Hi, Harrison. Hi, Nub. Yes, we are working on a VR editor today, which is in very, very, very early stages, in the sense that I've only been working on this for about 2 weeks now, maybe. So it's basically just setup stuff that I've been doing and working with, you know, trying out different ways of interacting with things. And actually coming to the conclusion that even what I've built so far, I need to redo. So yeah, that's something that we're going to be a bit of a nice little exploration. I don't know how far we'll get today, probably not very far, but we'll get through a few things at least. Hi, Grinch Walker. The Android kit a few months back. You mean Godot VR on Android, or you're doing something else on Android? Marcus doesn't support legs. No. Not really something that is usable in doing today. Mind you, as far as Godot VR itself is concerned, we now have support for the A2C trackers in Godot 4 at least, that allows you to track legs. So there's a project on a couple of guys on the XR Discord channel are running, where they're actually animating a full avatar for the player, and they have their legs working. So yeah, VR stuff on Godot is getting nicer and nicer. On Godot 3, it is definitely something worth trying out and worth working with. There's a couple of really cool projects in VR in Godot 3. In Godot 4, there's still some ways to go. For desktop VR, it's really, really good so far. For mobile VR, we're still running behind a bit on performance issues on Android. But that is something that is being worked on. So that should improve in the next couple of months. Hopefully it'll be improved quite a lot before Godot 4 stable is released. So you know, that's what you get with brand new render engines and brand new editors and everything like that. Takes a while to get these sort of things to come high enough on the priority list for us to actually spend time on it. That said, like I said, on desktop, VR is working really, really well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what people build with it. Hi, it's Alex. How are you going? Nice to see you again. All right, so like I said, very early days. It only does really basic stuff. So there's 2 things that I want to work on today. We'll just launch this up. Now, it takes a little while for me, for Sconce to run through this, unfortunately, even if it doesn't have anything to do. Well, last time was 17 seconds, it says, so let's see if it takes around 17 seconds again. I am saving up for some new hardware. My laptop has served me well, but it's getting slower and slower. I think a big part of that is that the SSDs are starting to reach their end of life. So sleepy. What time is it for you, Alex? It's what are we living at? It's 10:20 for me right now. So where's my controller? Oh, come on, start tracking. There we go. All right. So everybody who's familiar with Godot will realize that this is our project manager. And obviously on desktop, it's a little bit, you could just as well run this on the desktop itself and select your project and then go into VR mode. But the idea of this is eventually to make it run on mobile as well. So obviously, if you have a Quest or things like that, we need an environment to have the project manager accessible in VR. Now, the world around us is really boring. It's just a square on the floor. Maybe I'll make something nicer of that at some point. The square is only really there to anchor the player. If we don't have the square on the floor and we just have the windows floating, a lot of people can get sort of sick. Now, the other thing that you notice is that when I move a certain way away, the screen will recenter itself. So it is not completely following you, because else if you're interacting with it, it would move around constantly. But at least if you've moved too far away, then it follows you. The same thing with moving backwards. So if I move backwards, we'll see that the screen slowly comes towards me, slowly pushes away. So it's not tracking as if it's anchored to the camera, to the player's position, because that, again, would lead to a lot of motion sickness. Believe me, I've tried this. But having the UI just floating space and then follow the player, especially with the ground sort of anchoring you in place, makes for a much more pleasant experience. The other thing that I've been working on is this little virtual keyboard. And one of the things, because it's transparent, my laser pointer kind of goes straight through it. It's really hard with the laser pointer to see what I'm touching. However, the little ball here, and again, I also need to still make a controller model so that we don't have just a floating ball in space. But you can touch the keys with the ball, and it will work. Now, there is still some work to be done here to make sure that it always detects when we are no longer pressing the keys. There's some issues with that still. But that's one of the things that I'll eventually possibly end up on today, or at least this week. The other thing, of course, is that for that to actually do something, it's supposed to type here. And again, I've got everything in place that should make that work, but it's not working. So obviously there's some stuff to fix there. Basically, whenever you press a key on the virtual keyboard, it sends out a key event, and from that point onwards, Godot treats it as if it's a key being pressed on a real keyboard, and all the normal handling should work. So there's something in the way that this viewport is being rendered, that the viewport is not getting the input events pushed to it. So, and I don't know whether that is a problem with the code that I wrote, or whether it's a problem with the code of this pop-up. In Godot 3, all pop-ups are inside of the windows that they're popping up from. But in Godot 4, we actually have this feature that you can open up actual windows in the OS. Except, of course, in VR, where everything is in our beautiful virtual space. So while this is a window floating in space, and I can have multiple of those open, having the existing logic of the project manager or Godot itself that opens up windows, now open up a VR window, that is something that I still need to work on. Obviously I can go into edit here, and that will shut down Godot for a second, and then it will reopen Godot itself, and you'll see that this one still goes onto the desktop, but I still have a view internally once it runs up. And this is something that I'm going to change. It's probably the first thing that we're going to work on today. This was our original idea until we got stuck. And if it wants to run, Come on, don't let me down. I'm just looking underneath my. This is the one thing that I don't like of modern headsets is that I don't have my little flip up thingy. All right, so I'm now seeing nicely the VR environment in here. The nice thing, of course, is one of the problems. I'm actually going to take this off because you guys don't see what I'm seeing. But it's actually rendering my VR interface inside the main editor, which is really weird because it's actually not part of the scene. So yeah, that was one of the issues that I was running into. But the more pressing issue with this actually became apparent when I was making the menu systems, and in this case, our scene node editor that we have over here that is being reproduced over here. That is faked to some extent because all these panels, so the scene panel, the import panel, all the menu systems, everything that we have in the UI here has been written in a way that only one version of it can be running at a given time. They're not, you cannot have multiple scene tree docs open at the same time. So the fact that we're seeing a copy here, we actually break how Godot works and so on. So the discussion that we had last week is to not go down this mixed path where we have the desktop UI still running on the desktop and we have the VR UI, but because for mobile VR we needed to port everything over in the long term, we kind of decided to make that the way that everything works, even on desktop. So that'll be a change that we're working on today, and that'll be a big one. All right, let me catch up with chat. Marcus, yeah, the typing thing, I have put in the virtual keyboard as a starting point, as a jump off place. But typing in VR is not fun. Obviously, when you look at what some of the vendors are doing who are doing pass-through, like Meta does, or who are full AR, they're now working with actually having your physical keyboard. So that guy actually mapped into VR so that you can actually type on it and see where you're typing. That is kind of interesting. But the other one that I found really interesting was an experiment that I saw the other day of someone who said, let's do away with that. That's a solution that works with physical hands. It doesn't work in VR. Let's come up with something that does work in VR. And he created basically this interface where you had a ball around your controller with all sorts of letters in different segments of the ball, and whenever you wanted to type a letter, you move towards that letter with your controller. And that actually looked like it was a really fast way to enter in text. Whether it really works, I don't know. I've never tried it, and what sort of drawbacks that has, I don't know. But it's nice to see that there are people who are thinking in different ways to solve this problem. Instead of saying we are all used to this keyboard, this physical keyboard thing, let's bring that into VR, and then come to the conclusion that controlling that with basically having two controllers in your hands doesn't work, to coming up with a completely different way to enter text in VR. For me today, right now, I needed a solution. I hope we can get the solution to work. That we might replace it in the future with something more intelligent or more easy to use. I hope we come up with a good idea, because I do not want to start entering code with a virtual keyboard like that. I think it will be amazingly impractical to write code inside of a VR editor. Now, again, that was my original idea, to have this mixed environment, especially on desktop, where you still had the normal UI on desktop in which you can, do your normal typing, and then you put your headset on when you actually want to test your environment in VR, or if you want to, which is, I think, for me, the most appealing part of having a scene editor in VR isn't to create the full game experience or to test your game, which only applies, of course, for VR games. But I think the abilities to do level design in VR is, even for non-VR games, something that that could be game changing for artists. And that's really my appeal. That's why I'm doing this. I want to see how far I can take this, how easy I can create it, that you can manipulate the position and location of objects in your scene, how easy I can make it to add things and change things in a scene. And I think VR will have a real benefit to level designers in placing things and seeing where they're placed and having a proper idea of perspective and where things are, information that generally is lost when you're in looking at a 2D screen. So. Malcolm, absolutely. I would actually say that in this case, I went the other way. I kind of used our XR Tools keyboard as a base to create this one. So, yeah, one way or the other, they'll either eventually match up, or obviously, once this is really, really working, is that some of the parts of the VR editor, instead of them being part of the VR editor, I might actually make them part of the XR system itself. So, for instance, a virtual keyboard, having that as a core component in Godot seems like a benefit to a lot of people. So we might go there at some point and then no longer need the VR editor in XR Tools. Evil Chair Slayer, are all VR headsets supported? Most are, especially in Godot 3. The big, the footnote there is we are OpenXR based. So we basically support any headset that has an OpenXR runtime. What falls outside of that is a number of headsets that don't yet support OpenXR, for which we do have a system to create additional drivers. So while OpenXR takes center stage, we still have the mechanism to create specific plugins that introduce support for other headsets. The other big exception is currently on mobile VR, so Quest, HTC, Pico. We currently only support the Quest. Now in Godot 3, it is unlikely. Well, I wouldn't say unlikely. Currently, there isn't anybody who has the time and resources to spend on porting our plugin to the other platforms, even though technically that shouldn't be too difficult. The big issue that we have with our plugin is that you would need a different plugin for every different headset because of the way that the loaders work. In Godot 4, we solved that. We've moved OpenXR into the core, and we've encapsulated the loaders into a plugin system. Right now, the only loader that has a plugin is the meta loader. We'll soon have a version for the Chronos loader, and we are planning a version for the Pico loader, which means that in theory, Godot 4 should be running on both the HTC hardware, so what's it called, the Vive Focus, I think, and the Pico 4. But again, those things, that work hasn't come to the top of the priority list yet. So it's planned, but it's not yet there. I'm really, really, really hoping that all the mobile VR platforms that are currently doing OpenXR are going to switch over to the Chronos loader. Meta obviously did their own thing because the Chronos loader wasn't available yet. Chronos, by the way, being the organization behind the OpenXR standard. So HTC, I think, was the first ones to fully support the Chronos loader itself. Again, talking about Android. So hopefully Meta will switch over at some point in time. Pico will switch over at some point in time, and then we can bring the Cronix loader back into the core, and you won't even need a plugin to run Godot VR on Android hardware. As far as desktop is concerned, yeah, most of the big names are all on OpenXR. Any headset that works with Steam VR obviously works with Godot because Steam VR does all the support for us. So yeah, there it really is that not all the headsets yet have taken the time to support OpenXR. And the most important gap there probably is AR. For some reason, many of the AR manufacturers have not jumped onto the OpenXR bandwagon yet. Microsoft being the main exception there, Microsoft having adopted OpenXR from day one, well, almost day one, from at least from as early as OpenXR, the spec was made public. HoloLens has been running on OpenXR. The problem that we've had is that Microsoft only supports DirectX. And of course, Godot being an OpenXR renderer, and Godot 4 being a Vulkan renderer, we have not been able to target the HoloLens. That might change in the very near future. Pedro has been working on a DirectX driver for Godot 4. That's actually up and running. It misses a couple of features to make it usable for VR. But as soon as I have some time to really play with that, I don't think we're very far off to having Godot 4 run OpenXR over DirectX. In which case, we should be able to support Windows MR natively, and in theory, we should be able to run Godot on the HoloLens. So, fingers crossed that we'll get there. Abdul here. My gaming run? Not doing gaming at the moment. DM, it's more that that when we look at how we are used to using our hands, that until we have really accurate hand tracking, we're getting pretty close to that. We don't have that interaction. The other thing that's just really important is we don't have tactile feel, right? If my virtual keyboard is over here and I'm just moving it higher than would be comfortable, you know, if I was typing on that keyboard, I'm not feeling that I'm hitting keys. One thing that is really important when I have a physical keyboard is, especially when you're used to blind typing with 10 fingers, is feeling where the keys are under your fingers so that you know where you're typing. And that sense of feeling is something that we don't have in VR. We have the visual part of it. We can see the keyboard where it is. We can see the movement of the hands. But feeling how you're interacting with the world is something that isn't good enough to do such precise interaction with something like a keyboard. That said, the interaction with a keyboard is a very specific use case. For most of the applications in VR, you don't need that level of interaction. So it is one of those things where VR as a solution offers a whole bunch of pros, but it also has some cons, as any other solution. So again, you know, looking at what we're trying to do with the VR editor, hoping to be in a month or two from now as a first version, is when you look at a desktop and you look at editing scenes in a desktop, you have a lot of pros over VR, like being able to use a keyboard naturally. And you have a lot of cons opposed to VR as far as visualization is concerned. And the fact that on a 2D monitor, you don't have depth perception in the way that you have in VR. And even with a 3D monitor, which, they're cooler than the industry thought. I still believe that we gave up on 3D monitors too quickly. However, compared to the sensation of being able to judge where things are in relation to other things, the difference between a 3D monitor and VR is the difference between a Model T Ford and a modern day Formula One Ferrari, for instance. And the downside of that is that until you actually experience that in VR, it is impossible to let people know why that is. You really have to experience it. But in the bottom line is, when you look at how we see things around us and how our brains naturally are able to communicate to us how far something is, what is in front of something else, having this natural ability to quickly move your head and look around something, that experience can only be replicated in virtual reality. It cannot be replicated on screen. And when you're level designing, or a bunch of games that make good use of that, VR offers something today that is not reproducible on screen. The fault, I think, in the industry right now is we're trying to recreate experiences that we are used to on screen, and therefore only are marginally better compared to experiences that are targeted at what makes VR good, and then suddenly making people realize, like, hey, I can do something in virtual reality that I can't do anywhere else, even if something like interacting with the keyboard is one of the places where VR is lackluster. Gamma Games, yeah, IntelliSense is, I think, really important. Auto completion is really important. You really need to get to the word that you're looking for with as few interactions as possible. So that is definitely one of the places where things would be better. The other one, which I find really interesting, and this is not something that I'm going to be looking into in the very near future, but is something that I want to look into in the long run, is that visual programming. So programming with flowcharts or programming with blocks, whatever sort of visual UI that you are interested in, I think is actually a potential option for solving the coding issue in VR. That instead of having to type words, when you can drag blocks together and connect them, that is actually something that really works well in VR. The other thing which is amazing when you compare that to visual programming, again, on a screen, is in VR you have your entire space. A big problem that visual programming has, even when you're programming visual shaders, for instance, is that the amount of space that you require to do anything complex, you lose track of what you're doing when you're on even a fairly large monitor. And in VR, you don't have that problem. First of all, you're not limited to 2 dimensions. Second of all, you're not limited to a small area. You have your whole room around you, but you can also use depth. You can put things behind each other and still see the relationship between those components. So I'm really interested to see where we can take that. Marcus, exactly, and it's really interesting to see Blender's going down that route. Although I haven't done much with Blender's VR view, but I got the impression that it's mostly around visualizing to see what you're working on. But compare that, for instance, with what was it called? I think Medium, and certain other tools like that, where you're actually modeling inside of VR. Some people do some amazing stuff with that. And especially sculpting is so much easier inside of VR than it is on screen because of the depth perception that you have and the ability to move around the thing that you're sculpting or that you're working with. Really, that's really good to know. I'm glad that you have enjoyed the content so far and found it useful. Gugard, I'm only catching up to your message now. I know that you sent it quite a bit of time ago. Nice to see you. Hope you're doing good. How's your zombie game going? Have you still been working on that? It's been a long time since I've seen you post updates on that. Little FPS game that you were working on, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, a nodes and panels approach, exactly. But it's, again, it's being able to place those things in space and being able to physically, well, quote unquote, physically interact with those and connect them, just the whole space of that. I still need to check out Horizon Worlds, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that I'm not the first one to come up with the idea that this is a good way forward for programming in VR. So I should really check that out. All right, so the first thing that I wanted to do is to change the code that starts the VR editor. All right, put some more. I'm actually going to make sure that my demo starts when I do that. So this was the code that we ran for the project manager. So obviously that's only included if we are in the tools build. This part in the code in main, if we're supposed to start the project manager, we do this for benchmarking just to see how fast things go. So that's for analyzing how the engine is working. Editor hint is true. That's the thing that makes sure that inside of code you can do your is editor hint thingy. I haven't looked into overlay itself. I really need to have a look at that. We still need some more support for overlays in Godot. I know that Ben used to implement a lot of things around that. So, Gogart, I know that feeling. I have put a couple of my projects on the back burner as well, simply because I have too much on my plate. Though the thing, of course, is even with the overlay, I don't know if they come with a standard keyboard there or not, but it still is the same sort of interaction, a rendering of a virtual keyboard in front of you that you need to type, or use your laser pointer to hit buttons. That principle is just flawed. It's really what it boils down to. It is not a fast way to interface. Especially not compared to someone who is a proficient 10-finger blind type, because you can type real fast. So I'm setting a Boolean here, whether we have the VR editor, and then if our VR editor module, everything in the VR editor is contained within a module, so that you can leave it out. You don't have to compile it into the source code. But if it's compiled into the source code, we actually call our init project manager, and that will actually return true if the project manager should be running in VR and was able to be set up, or false if it wasn't able to set up, wasn't supposed to run. And of course, if it's false, then we do our normal thing. Now, I might change this slightly in the near future, where I'll have a separate check whether the VR project manager is needed. And if that's true, run the run the project manager in VR. And if that fails, exit out. Else, do the old logic. But due to the nature of how this works, I've gone down this route for now. And we have to scroll up quite a bit up to find the code for the editor. The editor starts quite a bit earlier. Here we go. And here, the current approach, and obviously we're going to be changing this, is that we start up the normal editor first, and then we start up the VR editor. And the idea behind this first was that the normal editor would be running on desktop, as I've mentioned before. But the other thing is that the way that the editor is built, it kind of needs the main editor node in order to access all the editor information. So the VR editor kind of piggybacks. We need to change that. We're now going to go down the route where we either start the desktop editor or we start the VR editor, which means that the VR editor needs to reproduce a lot of the functionality that's in the normal editor. Luckily, 90% of that logic is contained within classes that are included in the main editor. Main editor node is a container of the editor. It has a lot of code that we need to duplicate, but like I said, 90% of the code we can reuse by using the same objects. And in fact, we need to do that. This will also mean that we are going to have to make a editor node base, an editor node base class, which we then inherit and create an editor node and inherit that same class for VR editor. And we're going to start with that class to be a abstract class with very few functionality, because we're going to slowly fill in the functionality that we need. And probably just, kind of trial and error, start with the simplest version and see how much falls over in compiling. Everywhere where the editor node singleton is used, that we now need to point it to the base class, we'll need to work on that. Marcus, yeah, this is not going to be in 4.0. Obviously, anybody who wants to start playing with it, once it gets to a point where it actually does something useful, right now it's nowhere near that yet. Yeah, you can obviously build it from source and play around with it. But I do not expect this to be merged into master in 4.0. I would be surprised if this is a 4.1 feature. I'm hopeful that it will be, or that a first version of this will be in 4.1. But we're talking about 3-4 months of development work before we're in a place where we really have all the features that we would want before merging. I think it will probably be, depending on depending on what happens in the next month. Suddenly I get thrown onto something else that is more important because it's a showstopper for releasing Godot 4.0 stable. Then obviously I'll be working on other things and won't get as far as I hope. But if I'm able to work on this for the next month or so, I do think that as far as basic functionality is concerned, we'll be quite a ways ahead in about a month's time. Again, a lot of that is possible because we're reusing so much of the existing editor. Sorry. Use hand position systems. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, really, but I think that sounds like the idea that I saw demoed the other day, where your movement, you have a circle or a sphere of letters that you move to by moving left, right. Like the circle of dialogues that you have in many games that are joystick controlled. And actually, circular menus is something something that works really, really well in Vue. If you look at stereo kits, which is a really brilliant project by what's his name, Nick Klingerman, I think. I probably butchered his name, but it's a framework for it's basically a base that gives you all the functionality to start up OpenXR, to set up your rendering environment. Has a whole bunch of default components for UI components specifically built for VR, and then you can build your VR solution in there. But I think it's C++, so you just build the rest in C++. But he's done some really amazing things with UI. So yeah, very impressed by it. Anyway, let's start by, I'm just going to take this all out. So move that in here. So that is now no longer relevant. That's no longer relevant. That moves up. So basically, I'm just changing this to be basically the same as what we did with our project manager. So we're saying if we don't have, well, by default, we don't have a VR editor. If our module is enabled, we're going to initialize our VR editor. And actually, no, in this case, we're going to do this differently. We are going to say, we're going to have init editor, return a valid editor node. And if we still don't have an editor node, we build the desktop. So that's going to be our base. Now that means that we are going to need to go and create a editor node base first. I'm just going to add that in here. Editor node base public node, because that's going to take over from this guy. Boom, boom. There we go. And now our editor node is actually going to be coming from our editor node base. Pretty straightforward. Now, a lot of things are going to fall over the moment I do this, but this is now going to be our editor node base. And the reason why a lot of things are going to fall over is, for instance, we won't have our export preset here. So that's going to be one of the first functions that we're going to be virtualizing. Same with you start a benchmark, and God knows what else we'll run into. But, you know, it's a starting point. And again, I think with this change that I've just done, it's going to take a while before this even compiles. So we're going to have to see where we go with it. Now, I'm going to close these project manager things because we're not going to be working with the project manager for a while. Those open. Close that one. I just want to clean up a little bit. And then that's our normal editor node, and here's our view. So the first thing that we can change, obviously, over here is that we want the VR editor to also be of node base. Yeah, that's interesting because I needed to take that from node 3D. I don't think that matters in this case. I'm wondering if I therefore need to introduce a node 3D base, but that's okay. So in this case, we no longer need U because we are starting, we are becoming U. Again, that was because we're piggybacking on the editor. Now we're going to sort of take over part of the editor logic, which also means that I no longer need to send that through here. Where is our code that we were working on? And of course, let's make our life easier and go do this. We should remove main closure. So we actually don't want any of these parameters here. So Let's go and change that here as well. We no longer have you guys. We do have you because we're setting up the viewport early. Yeah. I guess I could kind of call it from inside now, but I'm not going to change that just yet. So our is init editor mode. Did I remove that yet? We no longer have a standalone mode. We're always going to be standalone. Janju, yes, this will eventually be for game development inside of VR. Now, our immediate goal is to get enough functionality so that you can do level editing in VR. That's our first milestone. But eventually, if this goes well, we want to have the full game development experience translated to VR, with the end goal being that you could alter VR games inside of VR on both standalone devices and desktop devices, which obviously can be pretty cool. You're on the road with your Quest, and you just put your Quest on while you're in your hotel room and you work on your game. Yeah, it has some interesting prospects. All right, so okay, I do need to send through a node here because I need to send through our root, else we don't know what to join things on. So that should become the same as how I implemented that here. Scene tree. Yep. VR editor, so we're going to have to put that in. And for whatever reason, that is called SML. Yeah, SML. That's what we add this to. Don't know why. Yeah, I found that a really interesting name, but scene something. I don't know what the abbreviation is for. I don't think it's small. I think it's okay. So that means that we actually don't do get tree, but we get root. So the root of our scene tree is actually the main viewport that we render to. So we want to grab that viewport. This was the old code that set up a viewport, a separate viewport for HMD rendering, which then became our root node for our VR editor, which is why I found it so weird that even though our components for that we actually see inside of our headset as the UI were also represented on the desktop, because they're supposed to be isolated in that viewport. I must have overlooked something. Anyway, so we have an extra command here to make sure that vsync is disabled. For VR, it is really important that you disable the vsync, because it's actually going to be OpenXR that takes over the syncing here, especially considering that very often your desktop will be running in, say, 60 frames per second or 60 hertz, and you will have a headset attached that might be capable of doing 120 hertz, 90 hertz, which is pretty cool. You would be slowed down by the vsync on the main monitor, and that would so yeah, it's something that you have to do when you do VR. Here we make sure that we do that. Sorry, okay. Actually, let me just quickly see what that is. Oh, that one actually I do need to. Oh, yes, 5 minutes late. It's just a message that I answered. Hi, Neology. Thank you. Always good to hear people like what we're doing. So yeah, that was a vsync thing. You just need to turn off because OpenXR takes over. We are enabling here our view or our XR modes on our viewport. So we're enabling VRS. This will only work if VRS is actually supported on the hardware. And VRS simply means that we are rendering at full resolution where the focal point is, and without eye tracking, the focal point always being the center of the screen. And then the further out you go, the lower the resolution will be, just to save performance. We also set our viewport to use XR. This means that the viewport will now be responsible for outputting what it renders to the headset. Also switches the viewport to stereo mode, and it links the viewport to our VR camera. There's some interesting bits, by the way, there that I still need to fix as well, because right now Godot does not make the tracking in Godot does not make a difference between the VR nodes that we add for editor and the VR nodes that you've added for your game. So when you walk around your room while you're in the editor, you'll also see your character walk around your VR game. That's still something that I need to fix. All right. So now we instance our VR editor, so we no longer want this one and this one, but we are now going to return that guy. And here we're going to return a null pointer, and that also means that we need to change our init to saying we're going to return an editor node base. That should take care of our setup. Now we need to take care of our inits. We no longer have that guy. We no longer have that guy. I'm not going to worry about that. We're not going to worry about that. So that means that we also need to, or already removed that, did I? Yes, I did. So now we're going to create our avatar. So there is a class called VR Editor Avatar, which is our origin node, our camera node, our two hand nodes. It has all the logic for our hand pointers in there. And that class will eventually have all the logic for being able to move around our virtual world and to have the base logic for interacting. And that's shared between the project manager and the normal. So yeah, we're going to add a basic UI, and I've just made some remarks that eventually I want to make, because all the UI components, when you look at the desktop editor, it's one window with all the docs. The VR version is more like having everything in floating windows, so that you can have them sort of off to the side, so they don't obstruct your view into the virtual world, but you still have them accessible. Now, right now, they're all fixed sizes in fixed positions, but obviously we want to allow the user to interact with them, move them around, minimize them, or make them bigger, whatever they choose to do with them. But that still needs to be good. So yeah, this logic is pretty basic logic on how the editor works. I am just having a look at what I need to disable right now. I think everything from here onwards. We want to disable. Because that we need to re-implement as on purpose. I'm putting these not properly indented, because that way I can tell apart what we're currently just disabling for the sake of moving this over to the new solution. All right. And close this window so that we don't get distracted by things that were there. I'm just going to run through our build. I really should make these moments for catching up with chat, I guess. And I might as well see who actually tried to call me just now. Oh, that was someone calling me by accident. That's good. All right. So here we can see the sort of errors that we're expecting right now, because obviously, you know, a lot of this code is expecting our editor node base to be your editor node, and our editor node base doesn't have the functionality of it. Now, let's start fleshing this out a little bit with the stuff that we need, at least to begin with, which is we definitely want a constructor. We want a virtual destructor. We want to get a single version. So the difference is going to be, and obviously I need to declare a variable for that as well. By the way, it's going to be static, because that's a static function. And the same for editor node base singleton. We need to create those obviously in our source code in a minute. But eventually we will be calling our singleton on our editor node base in most of the code that needs to work on both the desktop editor and the VR editor. While things that are specifically for the desktop editor will eventually be calling, and it should be a get singleton on this guy as well. So that singleton will be the singleton variable of the desktop editor, not the base one. What's wrong with your eyes, Canillium? You don't like the fact that I'm on white mode? I hate dark mode. I can't look at that. I always get lost where my windows are. All right, so let's implement those. For that. Yeah. Yeah, there's a bunch of us that are working on VR Android support. Myself from time to time. Fredia does, and Googly, I always mispronounce his name. And I'm trying to find out the name of the fourth guy who is nowadays working on Android. Depending, of course, on what part of Android support we're talking about. So we define our singleton here. And then obviously our constructor will set our singleton. And oops, and our destructor clear it. There we go. Okay. Now we need to start looking at what these things are. Now, for some reason, this just won't work for me anymore. It's really annoying. I need to find out why that is. Why it doesn't go to the line number anymore. Okay, so that is a nice function called export presets. Cool. So basically the thing that we're going to be doing for most of it is we're going to make those virtual. And here we're going to override it. Which means that we can now put it over here, but as a abstract function. And then obviously we're going to need that here as well. And we're just going to have a placeholder function here. Hey, Squarepack, how you going? Let's just return. We're just going to return OK for now. I don't actually want to fail because that will prevent stuff from loading. All right, we might do a little bit more for that one. So that is this. So I'm going to start with doing the same thing as with our export presets. We're going to implement that as a virtual function. Let's keep the order the same. You can go, you're calling them in a different order. You know, I think it's smart enough to recopy that. However, I am now going to look up the function over here. Yes, we are going to copy that as is. And that means that we are going to need these two as well. And again, I'm not quite sure what we're going to be using those for, but because these are being used in the normal editor, because as far as I'm aware of, this is all about doing profiling and timing, we're going to want to copy that or re-implement that same code in the VR editor as well at some point. So that one we are going to keep as is. As scenes in session. I wonder what that does. The load scene is going to be the most important. All right. So we want that here as well. Oops. Override needs to go here. It needs to become a abstract function. Let's have a look. So that's about opening scenes and tabs. I think I'm going to implement that one returning false. The reason for that being that we need to start looking at, okay, how are we going to, and if we are going to support tabs in the same way as the normal editor does. Now, obviously, makes a lot of sense because you want to be able to switch between the different scenes of your game that you're working on very quickly. But they're not tabs in VR. We are in the environment of the current scene that we have loaded. We might have a window with tabs where you offer 2D scenes at some point, maybe. So I'm actually going to make a remark here that we're going to be implementing this in some future days. And I'm guessing that if we return false here, that will trigger that we are going to load our main scene when we load our game. I can't spell, I'm not English. So we'll leave that as is. All right. Then the last one, really big one, is load scene. And we'll likely find out that there are a lot of functions here that eventually will become virtual. Maybe even some that we just move into. Like the scene that's currently being edited. It makes sense to have that there. I'm even wondering when we look at something like load scene, whether that should actually be implemented here. I don't know yet. Now the other thing is, and I'm not going to worry about that today, but that is going to be a worry before this is over, is things like, for instance, these guys. So this means that if we're loading an existing scene file, and we have dependencies that are broken, we get a dialog. And right now, we don't have a way to open that dialog properly within the VR. Because the built-in system will open up a normal Godot desktop window. So again, we need to find a way at some point, in our VR environment. I've created this thing called a VR window, which is the element that actually handles the floating window in VR. At some point, that needs to be integrated into the Windows system of Godot. And seeing part of this is implemented on in a module. We'll have to see how that. Anyway, for now, we just want to get the basics working and see if we can get something going. And for that, we are going to duplicate this as it is, just for the time being. Okay. I'm just going to copy that in here like this for now. And I always forget to remove my defaults here when I copy that stuff. I might have done that for some of the other functions as well. We'll see. All right. Now the other one was do good. So let's go and have a look. That is actually going to load scene. Load scene itself. Goodness. All right. Oh, how funny. We have a deferral. Interesting. We could need that actually. Just having a quick look at what we're doing here. So we have our sim. Okay, so this is looking at if we already have an existing tab, whether our scene is in that tab, and whether we can switch to that scene. Which makes me wonder how the scenes are managed here. Are we somehow containing them? Well, that's something that we'll check with editor data, because obviously editor data is the thing that now. The other thing which is really interesting. So again, we, for instance, can redo this as a VR editor version of that. Okay, got a lot of stuff in here. I think we're going to copy this and then comment out a whole bunch of things that we need to make work. Because we obviously have our dialogues. Well, we might actually make entry points for that. That's kind of the nice thing about this, though. I do appreciate is that instead of directly opening the dialogue classes, we actually have methods that handle it. So we have a dialog display load error. We have a, and this is also a load error. We have a show except dialog here. So we can implement VR versions and actually pop up a separate little window there. That's going to be funky to build. Okay. Our scene tree doc. Yeah, let's go and copy this into our other class, but we're going to slowly be doing some modifications. Now, again, I am on the fence here, whether this should actually be a function that is in our base class and whether we should move parts of our data in our base class. Actually, I'm very tempted to do that. Because it makes so much sense to have our basic information part of the base class. So our editor data, potentially a scene root. and then still have virtual methods for our dialogues and things like that. God, that's tempting. That's really, really tempting. How much in this? Yeah, because everything GUI wise should be in the editor node class, and everything scene wise should be in the base class. That's what I'm thinking. Relate, wanting to know if Godot can be used to make a SteamVR overlay or that won't work. SteamVR overlays work with the OpenVR plugin, but OpenXR, we haven't really looked into the overlay system yet. That really needs someone who wants to build overlays and is willing to do some work on the code. As far as I understand, it should be a matter of starting OpenXR in a different mode, which I think we have a setting for. I'm just not entirely sure whether we're exposing that setting yet. But what other things are involved in actually making it work? I've never looked into it, and I can't believe that there's a lot of extra stuff that we need to do, because most of it is all handled behind the scenes. But again, I don't even know how far OpenXR themselves are with overlays. I know that Valve obviously is wanting to make sure that OpenXR is completely a complete replacement of their original OpenVR implementation. But I remember that they were having problems with it. There was some stuff in there that they were having difficulties with to make that part of the OpenXR spec. But I don't know if that was something that they've already resolved. I do, again, like I said, I do know that OpenXR has the settings to enable overlay mode. But I just don't know how much work is involved to get our current solution to work with it. So yeah, if someone wants to dive into that, that would be really, really cool. All right. So I think I am going to move our load scene into our base. Now this really should then move to the top. But this we won't have you. I'm actually going to make a note of that. Not the originally base. Creating. again, it's very early days right now. So first of all, there's no guarantee that this will remain our way forward, or whether this is the way that we're thinking that it should work right now, and we come to the conclusion it's not the right way. But in the end, having a base class for the editor so that you can create different editors, yeah, that's potentially a worthwhile bit of work. However, if we were to move, which is something that I naturally do for structuring my code, if I were to move our load function over here and all the other functions that we eventually move into base, then we get into this situation where Git is no longer able to track changes in that function, because it now sees a deletion of the old function and an addition of the new function. So if in that time someone else modifies the original function, we're going to lose that modification in the move. So I want to keep as many things as possible in their old location, which means that our git diff logic is just going to say, hey, this method definition changed from editor node to editor node base, in which case it's not going to break the merging. Now, once we finally then merge this, we can then do an additional PR where we move everything around, because that will be a PR that will only be around for a couple of days while we evaluate that everything's still intact. And that removes the risk of those sort of changes. While something like this, I'm expecting this PR to be in draft mode 2 months at least. So the chances of us doing something that will lose other people's work because we move code around, it's something that I want to prevent. If we are certain about this way forward and there is consensus within the group, again, there might be a good argument for saying, let's put the editor node changes into a separate PR, get that PR merged, irrespective of the VR editor. Simply because that just makes it easier for people to just evaluate this change by itself. Time will tell which direction we'll take. So obviously, now we have moved our load into our editor base. Our load is dependent on a whole bunch of things. So we now need to start moving those. And again, this is where really the entanglement of UI elements and data elements is. And I think our best guess is to start with the load function itself and just slowly go through things. So obviously, here's our first thing that we want to change. And these sort of things are going to be in a protected block because we want them accessible by our subclasses. But we are now defining them in the normal. And again, we might not even be. It'll take a while before we move all the dependencies from editor node to editor node. Okay, so here's an important one: editor data. So obviously, editor data is a class that is nicely put in here. Now, very likely, these other guys need to move as well. We're going to be doing it little by little. Now, for this sort of stuff, the same thing goes as what I just mentioned. We're moving code from one place in the file to another. Git will see that as deletes and adds. And there is therefore a chance that someone will do something that will be lost in rebase or merge validations. So we need to be really careful with that. In this case, we are looking at individual lines being a unit in itself. So the chances of it really going wrong are slimmer. But yeah, something to be aware of. All right. So that means we're going to go back to this eventually. That means that I do want to have a look at, actually, we're not going to tab through everything. I just want to have a look at our constructor. This is where things do get hairy because there's just too much in here. Try and find as we may. Well, I'm going to make our life a little easier. Not. There we go. All right, so this is our constructor of our edit. And I think in this case, we don't really care too much. But for instance, we have something like this. Now, one problem that I ran into before we can protect ourselves against that. Because we do a whole bunch of things here before, for instance, this is, I know I'm skipping ahead. Editor settings is another data point that we'll be wanting to put earlier. And this is the bit that was throwing me off. And probably whatever. Why is that called ID? Input singleton. Because I have a feeling that just about everything that we do here should be in our editor base node and not here. Because everything here has to do with a setup. And this is where we start with things that are different. Because this is where we start looking at things that are visual. Now, again, we have a mix, right? So ooh, I don't want to do too big of changes all at the start here. I'm not even sure what that does. But it's adding some notes, so it sounds something visual, right? Oh boy. Definitely a couple of things that I would want to move. Okay. These are the difficult starting moments. Well, how much do we go and move into our baseline? And how much do we decide to move once we get to because there are a lot of the things that make sense to have immediately in. That's definitely one. Now that, as far as I know, is our editor export dialog. That is something that is different between the two. We're going to have the VR editor export dialog eventually, if that is even relevant in this case. We will see, we will see. And this is really where we're starting to get into stuff that is specific to the desktop, or that may need to be re-implemented on. So a lot of things up until this point, up until about here, I think, should be moved to our base class. Now, the big problem, of course, is that I don't know how safe it is to change the order of certain things. Because let's say that I assume that this is part of our interface. Again, I don't know which bit the editor property name processor does. We can have a quick look at the class and see if it really. Well, it's definitely part of our inspector. Where is the class defined? Here we go. I think that's pretty safe to move. And I'm guessing the only reason why it's actually added into our node tree is to make sure that it gets destroyed. Okay. That's the thing is, I have a feeling that we need most of this in the VR editor as well. I'm actually going to, I'm going to YOLO it. Might end up regretting that. I'm going to move that to here. I like having our singleton right at the top. And I'm also going to do something that I just saw in here, which I think should really be in every class that is a singleton. And that is giving a hard condition there. If the singleton is already set, which means we are creating two classes or two instances of this, we actually get an error to indicate that's not supported. All right. So we're going to add our property thingy there. I think that's just to map names. So that's so fine. Obviously, that's just going to tell our compressed texture object that we keep our compressed buffers. So that's just an optimization. Input, that's all fine. So that is our next one that we need to have a closer look at. So that's actually going to our. Well, that's interesting. That is really interesting. Oh, that is the function that we are saying that we want there. Okay, that makes sense. So that is actually just a static function. It's not even a. Now, that means that get edited scene needs to be implemented on our baseline because else we're not going to do anything with it. Now, that is going to editor data. So this is one that is actually pretty safe to move. Probably set needs to move as well. So what we're actually going to do right now is I'm actually going to make a copy of that one. Actually, let's have a quick look at what the code is there. This is so funny that we're actually running through get editor, even though this is sometimes it's really weird how some of the code is accessing things through singletons while we have direct access to it. See, that's an static inline, and it just returns our edit data, which we already have available here. Anyway, so we're seeing roots. I think eventually we will be moving that into base class nodes. Now we'll leave that. I'm going a little overboard with my remarks. I'm gonna have a look at, yeah, because the new scene load scene is all over here. We no longer need you because we moved you. Now, this is, for instance, very interesting. That's going to be a difference between the two. Because in the normal editor, we have our tabs. And inside of our tabs is a viewport. In the viewport, we render our scene, which is why our scene roots is a viewport. In VR, that is not necessarily true. And that means that when we look at get scene root, we're going to have a real big question whether we actually want that to be a viewport. Again, the node will be a viewport in the normal editor, but it may be something else in our VR editor. So Ryan, exactly, that's my thought as well, is it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing, and it works. And for a version 1 implementation, it solves the problem, and we can make it something nicer. Agree with that standpoint. Anyway, that might become an issue, but we'll deal with that as we move and fix up more of this code. Okay. All right. So we're going through editor data. We have now added editor data in here. Very cool. Oh, we were still looking at the code that we moved for starting up. Okay, let's start there first before we get into more trouble. So we did our resource edited data. That is a normal, but we're now going to go through this. We're going to get our edited scene. Perfect. And our get edited scene is going through edit data, get edited scene root. Now, this is kind of weird. Is how do we have this as returning our scene node as a normal node, which again seems to suggest that we don't care that it's a viewport. And I'm assuming, why does that not work? Edit the scene roots for edit the data. Just want to see what it actually does. Okay. Okay, so that's getting our edited scene root for that particular tab. So if it's smaller than 1, then we're going to get our current one. Also going to get that. And that's just our root node. And that is going to be that scene viewport. Interesting. Well, we're going to have to see where we're going to be calling that get root. And again, it might be fine that it's a sub viewport because it might be part of the logic that is only used in the desktop. So this obviously is going to be interacting with our editor data, which we are now moving into. Okay. We need to go back to our starter code that we were evaluating. Okay. Why am I blind? I'm pretty happy about that. That's just going on the rendering server. That's what's going to be on the audio server. That's all fine. Navigation server, perfect. We want to turn off our physics servers. We're not using those in the editor. Because else we're going to have some really funky things happening, which we don't want. Well, I need a drink. One time. It's already 12. Probably going to go on for another hour, and I'm going to have some lunch, and then I don't know whether I am going to do this. I'm not going to pick this up today. Probably later in the week. I'll see if I will. We'll keep streaming this sort of thing. So let me know in the comments whether you guys are actually enjoying this or finding this boring. I know this is not my usual sort of content. And this is a lot of, especially at the start, there's a lot of this puzzling things out, doing tedious work. So I have no idea if this is enjoyable for anybody to watch or not. Like I said, I'm just doing this as a bit of an experiment. So far, everything here is just on all sorts of standard things. Now, this one is possibly one where we need to. No, that's also a code that's all static. Perfect. Disable placeholders. Now, scene state. That's a good one. Is that something that we know? It's also not something. So that's also all static, I guess. Now, our resource loader is all good. Now here we have a bunch of stuff for whether we're going to emulate mouse stuff. That is actually one where I'm sort of going like, is this valid to have here? I'm actually going to put a remark here, possibly this block. No. Not here. But I'm going to leave this here for now because I don't think there's actually much danger to it. Let's go back to the constructor of editor node. So here we're setting our singleton, but we're going to have more things here now. Yeah, this is so funny that that's actually being run as that's, which I think I already put in here. No. No, I did that on here. Exactly. So I need to leave that there because this is the one where I was having problems that I was getting errors all of a sudden because it skipped a step. Let's actually see projects. Okay. Because the thing is, here we're setting our singleton, and then we are doing that. Boom, end of story. Thanks for coming. And on our project manager, that runs clean, and on our, still have one. On our VR one, it gives some errors around the display server because it can't get the size of the window or something. So I'm not sure why that is. But that's one that I'm not going to solve right now because that's a distraction. I want to keep working on what we were doing just now. So I absolutely think, okay, that does mean, let's actually go and see if we can find the function of this. No. So editor node is not in here. So our settings is purely being consumed. It's not having any dependency on having the singleton set. So we can move that. I think that we can move that safely, but our scale stuff is specific to our normal editor. So that's stuff that I'm going to keep here. Oh, why are these at opposite sides of this file? Here we go. So it's going to go over here. I kind of like things that don't belong to each other should have some white space. Okay. I think we're getting close to having moved what we want to move. So here we got our scale. Now our display server is setting our minimum window size. This is something that we're not doing. Because again, that's just part of our GUI. Now we are using our window opening up on the desktop for showing our preview, and we don't really care about it. We're pretty happy with that being default. Okay. Now, these again are tempting to move down as well. That is our dialogue specific for our UI here. So unless we can make that work in VR, we're going to have a special VR implementation there. Let's see the file dialog. So these are all dialogues things. Yeah, these we are all going to keep here. Now here's our research loader. Now again, it's fine. I find it interesting that we have this and then we have that. And the other thing I can wonder about, and we can see that pretty quickly. No, those are just setters. You know, obviously, if these require the dialogues to be set up in case they open up a dialogue, you can imagine that the order here is important. But other than that, yeah, it just inserts one. I am actually thinking that everything that has to do with our resource loader, we want to have in a base class, because again, that is all stuff that is shared. All right. Sorry, excuse me. Some dust in the air. Okay. So all our resource loader stuff goes in here. Yeah, I think that is pretty safe. So we're going to display, we're going to keep it on. So our inspector. Motion plugin, visual shade. Again, I'm guessing that that is stuff that we would want to have. In both. So yeah, I think that goes into our base. I think we're nearly through this. Everything that we want to have in both editors. Oops. All right, our editor selection class is a class that handles what node is selected in our UI. And again, I do not know the full extent of logic in here. But I think it just keeps track of things. And again, that needs to work exactly the same between the two. With maybe the only difference that when you select a node in your theme doc, obviously the reaction to that is different between VR editor and normal editor. But the selection handling itself is the same, which is done in this. Now, this is, again, a variable here. And that means that we are going to want to move that one into here together with our data. And that also means that we want creating our selection of data to be here. I love how the order of this is. Yeah, no, I think it actually this is basically just setting up our environment for Godot. And here we're going to actually start okay, it's related to making scene data. Okay. Now we're really getting into the territory where we are starting to do things that are specific with them. Okay, register exports. That's probably something we want to do. All right, so I actually think that the theme we could probably share. All right, over here. So this. How much of this is reusable? Singleton? File dialogues, insert. I don't know. I don't know enough about what that does. Does it make sense to move those? I'm going to leave those here because, again, our dialogues we probably will need to reproduce, which means that we're going to have that's a real problem because I think the way this works is that if I create a new file dialog class for a specific type of file, that registers itself with the editor so that the editor can use it. The problem, of course, is that in our current form, the dialogues that we create for desktop will not work in VR because they need a different container. So my gut feeling says that this needs to be part of our base class, because else a bunch of the other stuff doesn't work. Actually, have a quick look at this because I think, again, this is probably just a container class. Just a node so that we can put it in here. So I would say that our file system definitely needs to be moved over. Okay. All right. I'm really struggling with these because my gut feeling says that that should move into the base class because the dialogues that we have available should be registered in the base class. That functionality should be shared. The big question is, can we make the dialogues work both in VR and in desktop? In which case this would be great. Or do we have a separate set of dialogues for desktop and a separate set for dialogues in VR? In which case, this will fall short. I am going to leave a remark here. Both VR and desktop. Actually, make it non-VR because nowadays that can run on Android tablets, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a desktop. All right. Now, the thing, of course, is that without moving the data that's here to our editor node, we might get ourselves into trouble. Then again, that is possibly where we are moving some more stuff virtually. Now, this one, still a node. So we have different plugins, but that's the plugins for how we export. This is not the export UI. This is just our export. Now, the thing is, this guy requires, I think, one of these two. Maybe not. I don't know. So I'm just going to make a remark here. we're just going to leave that there. Now, when we look at our color map and our theme, I'm definitely going to move those. It's, okay, let's put that over there, and I want to make a remark here and say, if we decide now, one of the nice things, of course, is if I finally get to that weeks from now, I can look at my own video and say, oh, that was where it went. That's why that remark is there. And again, if not, we have some cleanup to do in remarks, but better to have those in there than get stuck on. Okay, so that's all about that block that we might move there. Now, register exporters. Oh, bloody hell, yes, that absolutely needs to be in place. Now, again, the whole order of how, oh yeah, it kind of says, oh, theme we need. That's right, theme. So that's that one. It's going into here, that over there. And did I already do something with theme in our VR editor? Yes, I did. So I no longer need you because that's now something we inherit. So we no longer need those. Sweet. We're just going to piggyback on that. While I'm here, by the way, oh, I've already all come out, but I do want to go into our scene. I made some changes here, and I need to undo those. I'll eventually have to check my my logs around that and see if there's any more changes I made in here that I need to remove. I don't think so. What I do want to do, and that's I think the only thing that I think makes a lot of sense to add here. Too far to the top. There's too much at the top here. Okay. Actually, I'll move that here as well. That's a little bit overdone, but I am really thinking again, because I actually lost about 2 days mucking around before I found out that instantiating the scene tree doc twice, once for the desktop editor and once for the VR editor, broke. It's because our singletons pointed to the wrong class. And it had lots of weird behaviors. Like, why is this happening? And again, that's one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing right now. And saying, hey, we're going to have this base class for the editor, it sets everything up, handles all the data, we have a desktop implementation. So, kind of like those warnings being there. Might save someone after me from doing weird things. So here we have a whole bunch of definitions. And by the looks of things, I would want those to be in our base class. I think so. Why are we using this one? Oops. Did that not copy? Again, I think all of these will eventually need to be in our basements. I think all of this. Okay, this is just definitions. It's not actually doing anything, which is really good. Because again, I am very worried when we run things and it will be dependent on something that we've already done here. Because obviously that's the danger of what we're doing right now, because we're changing the order in which certain things are done. And if there is a dependency between the things that we're doing here, we are going to be in trouble. Actually, I think we remember someone saying that single line should always be without stop. Do we do anything else here? And again, I think that some of the order of this is just because of the order in which it was developed. But some things are dependent on each other. Actually, this is register. This is where we are defining what settings we have for the editor. And in other places, we're going to get those. And, yeah. All right, I think we're getting really close. Because from this moment onwards, okay. From this moment onwards, we're actually building the UI. Now, there's a few small things that I want to get out of here and move into our standard stuff, especially around stuff like our docs. And again, there is an argument for saying, no, we are going to, they're UI elements, so we are going to create them. So like, for instance, here we're creating a scene doc or a inspector doc, import doc, no doc. We are expecting those to exist. So not creating them means that we have access to singletons that are null. However, I think that is possibly our initial statement. Yeah, because that's the same. Sorry, I'm just thinking about, okay, what are we using here? Because I think that's the scene root. That's the root of our editing. And this is one of the big differences between the normal editor and the VR editor. The normal editor has a sub viewport for the whole editor. Inside of that, we have sub viewports for all the different tabs because we're rendering different scenes in there. So nothing's really using the main, except dialogues that might actually overlay on the sub viewport. And in the VR editor, we don't have that. We have our root viewport being our 3D environment, and then we have windows inside that display the 2D things. But we have all the 3D stuff rendered where we're in our main viewport. We're not going to send that off to a separate viewport. So that's also going to be interesting to see. What I think in this case is happening is if you have multiple tabs open, for instance, and you have 3D scenes open, there will be a sub viewport on every tab. And then that sub viewport will be the scene that is being displayed in that sub viewport. At least that's so far what I've been able to piece together. And then obviously that viewport will be hidden when the tab is hidden, and therefore all the geometry underneath it will be. And we're going to change the way that works. Now, in this case, what I can see the viewport that we're sending through here. Let's see how I reproduce that here. Scene roots. No, that is getting the scene roots from our editor. So from the scene that's currently being edited. And again, the thing that I find so really weird about that is that actually points back to the editor data, whatever our current scene is or whatever. Okay, so let's actually see inside. This will allow me to go in there. Where it is actually a node. It doesn't care about it being in a viewport. Which again means that if we, because this is the thing that I'm envisioning, right? Is in the UI, or the desktop editor, we have a sub viewport as the container for that scene being edited. And I'm guessing that when that's not the current tab, that viewport is just going to be disabled. And our scene tree doc obviously needs to point to that as the root node because that is what it builds. It's node tree. In the VR editor, that is just simply going to be a node in some sort of collection. And that's where we load our scene on, which is actually the next thing that we need to build before we can get the scene tree to. So as far as how our editor works, we don't really care. And this is actually really interesting because we're sending the editor data here. We actually know what the scene root is because we can actually ask it from the editor data. We don't actually need to parse that as a separate. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's going to work. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. It also means that I am going to go and I'm going to leave that there. Because one of the things that I don't know right now, where do we actually trigger loading our scene. So, load scene. That's a load scene itself. I'm just seeing, is this in our constructor somewhere? Should be. No, it's not. So, so when it sets this up for the first time, do we already have a scene loaded or not? That's an interesting one. Okay. Okay. Let's go check our load scene. Because again, I'm not going to worry about scene dot right now. I'm going to leave that logic as is. Just trying to go over in my head. Like, how is that going to work? So, inside tree before loads. So let's have a quick look at where that is done. Okay, source of change. So again, these are things that eventually will likely end up in the main one. There. Okay. That's interesting. I'm not going to worry about that right now. Because the thing, of course, is it's not going to be inside the tree the first time that it runs. So I'm wondering what is going to trigger that. And again, most of that trigger stuff needs to eventually move. Same with signals as well. I think a lot of the signal definitions are going to have to move into the base class. All right, so here we're going to just loop through the editor data and we're going to run tab change. Did we already move that? No, we did not. And tab change is going to now, of course, become a something that's going to be not really a tab anymore. Let's see. I'm going to add that here. I'm going to do it like this. I'm just going to put that in here. Of course, I should not have to announce, but whatever. And then has scenes in the session. There we go. To implement this. I'm going to put that more in there as well. So again, on the VR editor, that's not really going to be tabs, but it is going to be different nodes that are going to be selected there. That's just which tabs are going to be. That might actually move into base class. We'll see. So obviously this definitely needs to change. But we have an open imported okay, that means that obviously It needs to move to the base class, else we can't use that. Dude. Here. Okay. Now, that means that I'm actually going to do a fail here. Error. Oops. Fail. V. I don't know what is a good error to give there. Oh, unavailable. I think that actually is a really nice way to do it. So obviously, either we're going to have the same dialog work, in which case we're going to have the open imported set up in our base class, or else we need to specify it. Yeah. But in this case, it just means that that is going to work. Now, load errors is obviously also going to be, oh, look at that. I'm actually going to move both of those to here. Okay, let's move that before this. There we go. And again, if we have a load error dialog, we're going to do the same sort of thing there. This path, that should work. So show accepted is something we're going to make virtual for now. However, there we go. So just to make sure that it doesn't give us file errors, we'll also put it in here for now. Again, these are all sorts of things where we might have a different version there. Or we find a way that we can make those work. Okay. Get edit C. Add edit C. Perfect. So what does this actually do? That purely handles it over there. Okay, so that does not actually add it in. Cool. So So what we do here is we get our current tab, we get our current theme, oh, this adds a new tab, okay. Oh yeah, because we previously checked whether we already have it. Good. So this is just creating a tab that we need. Okay. So these are definitely things that we need to implement differently on each one. Now that's still all working with the editor data. So we do an update title here. Okay. So that one actually can become base. I have to say, this is nerve-wracking to do. This is pretty nerve-wracking. Okay. Let's do this. So let's do everything that affects editor data here, even though it has, because when we look at this, it is going to be update title and update scene tabs that we are going to have different between the two editors. Okay. All right. So that's going to be all virtual methods. Oh, when they're virtual, I need to do that. So I completely forgot about that. Okay, we need to do that to a bunch of these. Okay. So remove editor scene is actually implemented. Okay, cool. Not make that non-virtual yet. That's not only virtual. Sometimes. Ah. I'm sorry, guys. This is pretty much very boring stuff just to slowly move things over. I'm actually going to go and undo this. Instead, oh, not here. This one I'm actually going to implement here. So it's no longer going to be virtual. I think I've got a few that I accidentally marked virtual that shouldn't be virtual. So move that out there. Because I think we can just move that to base. That's you two. And we're simply going to move these guys over here. Don't have to worry about that anymore. Okay. Let's do this. License. Yeah, so we left that in there. Put that here. Okay, that's fine. Oops, why did I go there? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so dependency errors, we need to move that one. And that's probably going to move eventually as well. Okay, so load errors, we got dependency errors, very cool. Interesting. That's, I like having things in the same order. It really doesn't matter much. Okay, so here we're actually going to load our theme. Okay, perfect. Display load error. Well, that's actually kind of cool. So these we could. All right, so virtual volume. So it's going to go here. 0. Because the thing is, because that is going to be in here, right? Okay. Yeah. Oh God! Of course we have. That's all of a sudden. Right. Well, that's. Okay. Guys, I just need to check some cleanup stuff. Um. Right. Okay. That'll work. Thumbs up. All right. Sorry about that. I just love spammers in the stream. Okie dokie. Where were we? Oh yeah, I was looking at how these dialogues work because obviously we have these functions that we can make virtual. So are we actually using that? Load errors. Okay, we're going to have a new dialog there. And then we have a load error notify. Okay, so that goes through there. Cool. Okay, so we have that. That's all going to callbacks. But they are functions, which means that those can be implemented differently. Which means that these dialogues so that's being set up in it. So these dialogues can actually remain part of here. So where do we set up all the dialogues? Just trying to find. There we go. I'm just going to move those back here. I'm not quite sure if they were originally found there. This one is, but that one might have been in a different spot. But I don't think we need to move these, because as long as we move our functions as virtual functions here, that one no longer needs to be here. Needs to be that. Okay. Alrighty, we're getting somewhere. Okay, so hopefully that pattern is repeated everywhere. That we might create dialogues inside of editor, but actually opening them is always going through one of the dialog functions, which means that we can implement different ones in VR version. Now, implementing those will not happen today, unfortunately. But that is actually going to be really interesting. Harrison, I'm glad that that it's not a distraction for you. That is actually helping you. Again, I think the thing that I'm struggling with right now is because it's so early on in building the VR editor, and I'm still doing all these restructure things. I'd be surprised if this is entertaining content for me. I think once we're past this step where we've moved all this tedious stuff around and we actually have it up and running, then it becomes interesting. Because for instance, when you look at what I'm doing here right now, is I need to have VR versions of the dialogues that we have in our desktop UI. That's going to be interesting content, because figuring out how to get a dialogue to display and do it in such a way that we can reuse that dialogue, that approach for all the different dialogues that we need, that's going to be interesting for people to see who, eventually want to implement dialogues in their own projects. Although, of course, this is all done in C++ and not in GDScript, but a lot of the things that we're going to be doing is going to be similar, depending on whether you implement it here or there. Now, again, I'm really hoping that eventually I'll find a way to have Godot dialogues just open in VR as a VR dialogue. And again, that might be the thing that we end up implementing. Today, the whole thing is about getting these two different versions of the editor up and running and moving as much as we can into a base class. And I bet you before this is in a state to be mergeable, that base class is probably going to change a lot from what I'm doing. Anyway, so we were doing this one as well. So yeah, I already have done that. Oh, that one is down there. Okay, perfect. So that's the one that we just did. Okay. So here we're going to return to doing that, and we're going to remove our new editor. That's good. So set current scene. Okay, set current scene. Let's just go and search for that. Search for that one. Okay, it's bound to there. So here we go. Okay. Did that one. Let's see. Current. Oh, then it ends it there. Okay, that's fine. It's pretty cool, actually. Again, that is just doing nodes, so it doesn't care about this. I think we can safely move this to base. I need to double check edit folding, but I think we got that. And then just the edit current might be something that we need to move as well. Okay. And that means that this one. So that's actually a public one. Okay, so currency. Yeah, I think that's safe to have here. Let's have a double check if that is indeed. Yeah, indeed, still needs to be moved. Because this is something that actually is part of, part of our editor data that actually keeps track of which tree nodes you folded in the editor. I think it doesn't just do it for the scene tree, but for just about everywhere. It's a little helper. Right, so that should be that. This is all edited data. It's perfect. Get undo redo. That is actually getting the edited data undo. Why not use it directly on the edited data? I don't get it. But I'm not going to worry about it. Other than maybe making sure that's a static one. Okay. So yeah, that can just go to base. That's fine. That can move. All these three can move, I think. Okay. All right. I do that. Okay. feeling that a lot of this stuff is all going to end up in the base. Not sure if that is the best place. Just selection history, get main scene state. What does this do? Oh boy, that looks like something that. Oh my god. Okay, oh, we're gonna get that one. And again, this is why I think that these need to be created in our base. Now, what's main editor? What's that do? Editor table. I have no idea what that is. I honestly don't know what that is. Oh, that's going to be fun. Because I have a feeling that that needs to become does it? No, you can probably do that with virtual. Yeah, I think I'm gonna make that one. Actually, let's first do editor history because I think that is another one of these. You know what? I'm going to assume that our editor run is something that we also want to have in our base because we want to be able to run things from both the normal editor and the VR editor. So boom, that's all going to be there. That means that all starts, but I think that one also have to have a look at editor selection because I thought I had it already. Oh yeah, editor selection here, so that's cool too. But I think this one we're going to make virtual override. And I think the same goes here. Because I think that is going to be similar, but not the same in our VR implementation. Okay. Which means that we also need to put that here. And that means that we're going to put those over here. All right. Boom. Boom. Of course, spelled that wrong. Oops. I'm wondering if we have a place where we can actually show the title, but we'll see. Okay. That one is also. And again, once we start doing scenes swapping and stuff like that, so we're probably going to have some sort of. Again, in the normal editor, we have tabs that show us the scenes that we currently have loaded, and we switch between those. And in VR, we're going to have something different. So, yeah, It's going to be interesting. It's probably just going to be like a list that you can click on. We'll have to figure that one out. We'll get there one step at a time. Okay, so these are not all coming from there. I'm pretty happy with that. Again, we already have our edited data. You know, we might clean that code up eventually, but it's kind of bugging me that, you know, we have the pointer. Why get it again? It's like, why? Why do we do that? Because that's just what editor data does. It just, you know, we go and look at get editor data, which let's just double check that we have that one. Yeah, it's in our base now. And all it does, it returns our editor data from, we're in that code, guys. Why is that done? I know why, because when that code was originally written, it was probably in a static function and it needed to keep getting it. And then now it moved into here, and all of a sudden that's not needed anymore. Stop complaining, Baz. All right, so this is all about making sure that we save stuff from the current scene that we're currently editing, because we're moving away from that. And then here we're going to say, you know, we're now going to move to that one. So now we're getting our new scene root. No idea why we're doing that. If our new scene is a pop-up, we're going to show the pop-up. I don't know. I don't think that applies to us, but let's leave it the way that it is. I don't know. That seems strange. Anyway, it probably has a reason. Oh, that's if our root is a pop-up. Then we're going to show the pop-up. So I guess this is for when it's floating. That does not apply to all. Yeah, and obviously if we can't cast it to pop up, then that's going to be null, and therefore it's not going to be it. So that's just if our, yeah, if we somehow do that as a pop-up. Interesting. And I guess pop-up is a type of window. All right, so now in our scene doc, we're going to set our edited scene to our new scene. Okay, so I guess at this point in time, we're already expecting that to be set edited scene roots. All right, so that's making sure that we know which one it is. Now, this is the thing that I find funny. Here we're going to say if new scene. Oh, hold on. New scenes get edited scene. It's not edited scene roots. Okay, what am I missing here? Get scene roots. And if the parent of that is our scene root, we remove it. This is very confusing. Because I've edited scene routes. So how does scene route get set? Yeah, scene route is our main viewport. Actually, this up there. So that is not. It's past 1 o'clock, guys. Yeah. So our scene root is whatever node that we add our things to. I've got a bit more puzzling to do with this. But it is lunchtime for me, so I am going to end it here, I think. Not that I'm going to stop working on this, but I'm not going to stream everything. I'm actually going to try and get past this point, just rejigging things. And then, yeah, guys, let me know on the comments if you found it all interesting. Hey, Bailey, how you going? Long time no see. I'm just about to round off my stream. I'm sorry. VR development is going really well. So yeah, let me know in comments what you guys thought of what I'm doing here, or whether this is interesting, whether I should do this more often. It's been a bit of an experiment today. I am going to continue working on this. I think the next time that I do stream this development work, if I decide to continue doing this, is going to be when I've got this tedious bit behind me, because I think that watching me do this for another 4 to 8 hours until I've got this base class set up is going to become very repetitive and boring. Well, it's a shame that you lost your MetaQuest, Bailey. But, you know, that's life, I guess. Hopefully you'll be able to get another headset soon. So, yeah. I hope everybody enjoyed themselves. I will probably be doing this again, depending a bit on the feedback that I'm getting. Won't be today. Tomorrow, I'm probably going to be spending a day on getting a new release of XR tools done. I was talking to Malcolm earlier today. We both agreed that version 3 of XR tools is to a point where we should consider a official release. So I'm going to be spending some time on that. Very likely also going to do a video on that soon. So I probably won't be back on this until Wednesday. And depending on how much of this I get done, I might do another one of these on Wednesday, or am I going to do my normal stream Wednesday night? I might end up doing my normal stream Wednesday night and work a little bit. Well, I might then show how far I got with this during the day, and then maybe during the night do a little bit more work on our dungeon game. So. Yeah, Godot 4 is still not up to par when it comes to performance on mobile, but there is going to be a lot of work done in the next couple of months on that, I believe. I'm going to help out where I can, but there are other people who are going to be doing their part of that, which is going to be very exciting. So yes, very hopeful that Godot 4 will be very performant around Android soon. The other thing, a little bit of news on that is that OpenGL supports. It's getting really close to having VR support in Godot 4 as well. So that's very promising as well. So yeah. Anyway, gonna call it there. And thank you all for watching. I hope it was enjoyable. And yeah, like I said, leave your feedback in the comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you found this interesting. And yeah, we'll see if we do some more. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.